to me, this industry is a lot like a game. And the rules are constantly, being altered by rules or regulations or players. And then there's people that you're playing against that cheat. So it's, if you look at it like a game and you want to win, that makes it a little easier to kind of swallow.
Hello, welcome to Closers Club, the podcast where we sit down with operators and leaders who are building sales machines. Today's guest is someone who has been at the center of performance, marketing, and outbound call center and compliance lead generation for over a decade, Penny Lee. Formerly the VP of marketing at Medigap Life, where she led first-party data strategies and advertiser-publisher partnerships that are driving serious scalable growth in the Medicare and senior markets. But Penny's story goes deeper than that. She's a consultant, a board member, former VP of contact center operations, and partnership leader who's helping brands build compliant, high-converting lead funnels, all while mentoring teams and shaping policy through organizations like PACE, Customer Consent Council, and are paving the way for more ethical, human-centered sales experiences. Penny, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you on today.
Hi, Paul. Great to connect. Thank you for having me on.
How did I do on the intro? Did I leave anything out, or is there anything you'd like to add?
No, you did great. I'm impressed that you dug up that much on me.
It's amazing on what you can find online these days.
Yes.
But I do want to have one more question before we really get into the meat and potatoes of today's pod. I know that my fans are going to want to know, is there any relationship with Bruce?
No, unfortunately, no, no. But we could be twins.
Really? Okay. Very
Yeah.
funny. So again, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I usually like to start these conversations out by just getting to know the person behind the career. So if you're able to kind of take us back a bit and kind of talk a little bit about your upbringing and really what was your first job?
Yeah. So my first job was selling sweet corn in the summers, and my dad was a teacher to supplement income. I grew up in a very rural area of Minnesota. There was a sweet corn field behind our house. So I have 3 older brothers, and the 2 older ones were in charge of picking it. And then my dad and my brother, that's a year and a half older than me, and myself would go sell it. And I consider that my first sales job. You learned quickly, the quicker you sold, the quicker you got home. And, it was cute on the back of a pickup truck and, giving them, 13 ears for 12 and having discounts and, waving to people. And so that was probably my first real job.
Is that what kind of got you more into like a sales hustle mentality, or what was really the turning point for you to go more into a sales role? Or I guess the bigger question is like, how did that first job in selling sweet corn, how did that progress into creating a career in sales?
Right. So, I had various jobs throughout high school. I worked in a hospital pharmacy all the way through college. I was a pharmacy technician, so I really thought I was going to go into healthcare. And in fact, I did 10 years in pharma sales before I got into performance marketing, which was really interesting. I don't want to say it was, the wrong road for me, because it was a very different road. But it did teach me like incredible sales techniques, like listening to people, hearing what the objections are, and being able to answer and overcome those to be able to have a conversation with somebody. So, I think at that point, though, it was very tough. I was probably 28 years old and no longer wanted to do it. It was a tough job for females. There was it was a hard climb up the ladder. So I decided to switch. I always had a knack for tech, and, the internet was just becoming a thing, and sales. And, so I started as an emailer and then just grew up from there. So.
Very cool. And then when you look back, over your career, because you've moved between high-level marketing roles, consulting, operations, leadership. In your opinion, like, how do you see it all being tied together?
Yeah, strategy, I think, is the underlying common denominator, I would say. It's the one thing that kind of pieces everything together. I have a number of consulting clients, some that really knew what they wanted and just needed help getting there, some who were trying to get there, but it was a mess. But it all came down to like understanding what their goals were and coming up with a strategy. So it doesn't matter, I guess, if you're, starting a call center or building a sales department or trying to build a website. It's like, what do you want to do with it
Yeah.
was out the question.
That's pretty fair. And then when you kind of look specifically more at the call center and the call center operations perspective,
Yeah.
what drew you into that space specifically? Like, how did you actually get started of getting into the sales call center environment?
Yeah, I was thrown into that one on the deep end. So when I first went out on my own, I was approached by a client of mine, and they wanted a call center, and I hadn't done it. And they just asked, "Can you do it?" And my answer is always usually yes. And it was great. I mean, it was literally getting thrown into the deep end. It was not success at first try. I tried to do things the way I thought that they should be done. And it was a really good lesson learned. After, you learn quickly what not to do. I will say that we had a really good second go at it, about 3 months later, and it took off from there. So
Pretty good. And what would you say, like when when you started getting into it, you're running into failures or dead ends, like what was your motivation to like continue staying in that space?
right. I think knowing that there's a solution to most problems, and figuring it out, to me, this industry is a lot like a game. And the rules are constantly, being altered by rules or regulations or players. And then there's people that you're playing against that cheat. So it's, if you look at it like a game and you want to win, that makes it a little easier to kind of swallow, for sure.
And can you unpack that? Like, what do you mean by the industry's kind of a game?
Yeah, it is. It's a game. So at the end of the day, we're trying to reach a consumer to sell a product or sell a lead or to get them on the phone. And it's measurable. That's why it's called performance marketing. We can tell what people are doing by how many calls are being answered and how many consumers are engaging in real conversation. And if they're not, you fail. Right. So, but the pieces that go into that to get the consumer on the phone, there are so many different nuances to the type of traffic, to the publisher, to, the ad messaging. And I guess that just takes time to really learn how to engage a consumer and do things the right way and still be able to turn a profit on it.
Yeah, totally. Um, when when you're looking at the operations aspect of call center, what would you say, like in your opinion, what keeps agents showing up like in the outbound roles? Like, is it the money, the competition, the game aspect, the energy? Like, how do you get agents to actually perform at a higher level?
Right. I think it depends on the product that you're selling. For instance, like a tax debt company is one of the companies that I've worked with. That's a different product, high end, high value. Getting real leads on the phone so you're not wasting their time is the right way. But if you have a fronter queue who is just churning through data to try to, find a needle in a haystack, I think it's providing as much quality data as you can to them as possible, so they don't get frustrated with the way that it's set up.
And how have you done that from a quality data perspective? Like, what kind of strategies have you put in place that keep the fronter queue or even the closers like happy with, like, yeah,
Yeah.
we're moving the needle in the right direction?
Right. One of the clients that I'm working with right now is set up a little bit differently than I've seen set up in the past, where they're actually having a fronter queue and a closer queue. So the fronters aren't spending the time, wasting the time on trying to close a sale. They're getting through the data and getting better qualified leads into their hands. Um, but it's been listening to the agents, and as we're building this up, understanding that there's so many different types of agents, and comes back around to the strategy. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to pay more for higher quality leads and run them through directly to the closers, or are you going to take a risk and buy cheaper leads and have fronters roll through that with you? And what does that cost analysis look like? Is it actually saving you money by being able to consume more leads but get them through the system faster? And those are all learning moments with each client. Everybody is different in how they do it, but really listening to what the client is and what they want out of it.
And then what would you say, with, you're a consultant now, you've consulted in the past, like even when you were starting, what would you say is like the biggest failure that you kind of run through, and like what did that actually teach you outside of like fixing the problem? Like what did that failure actually teach you from a leadership career development perspective?
Right. I think not knowing which questions to ask. Being able to be capable of doing something that they're asking is one thing, but having the support of the company to be able to do it is different. So making sure that people understand the resources needed to accomplish their goals. This isn't magic. If you come in as a consultant, really defining what it takes to make that happen. Because everybody's looking to cut corners and costs,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, you can't build an empire with one person.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen that way. So
Yeah. Very true. Very true. And then, when you're working with, is there like an average size of client that you work with? Like, do you work at like people that are just trying to start up from zero or is it more like mid-market, or like how do you
yeah, I would
space?
say bigger players in the space, people who have done a really good, where it tends to work really well is for people who have built really good core products, whether it's an agency, whether it's a call center, whether it's lead generation, or they have their own product. They've done one or two of those pieces very, very well, but they need to plug in the third. So being able to sit down and say, okay, we want to add calls into our channel mix.
Hmm.
How do we do that, and what does that look like, and are we set up for that? And just having that conversation until they understand what it takes to build that and bring it in house.
Yeah. Okay. And then what is typically your approach to that, where you're able to scale these campaigns up, and it doesn't have to be like from zero, but like what is your approach for like scaling a campaign from minimal success to like full blown performance of like this is what good looks like?
Yeah. Well, if they already have something in place, I usually, wireframe it out for them. We sit down and we go through each step, and where like the drop offs might be happening, whether it is the data, the quality of the agents, or the technology. Lack of reporting is a huge one for
Mhm.
people. So understanding what they currently have in place. If they don't have any of that in place, it's outlining that and saying, this is what we would need. This is what you need to feed the machine to be able to do that. And then, just kind of building that, forecasting the entire model out, and what they want to get out of it. So it's very different if somebody's going to consume those leads themselves or they're going to sell them third party. Each client is so unique. Everyone has been very, very different. I've been able to take a lot of core pieces, but it's never been a template that I can just, you know, chop shop into one to the other.
Yeah. I would imagine that there are some kind of systems, repeatable systems that you use. Just wondering, when you kind of look at those systems and these building blocks that you've put together, how how have you been able to build those in like a scalable way without kind of killing the creativity, right? Because I would imagine with like a lot of sales, there needs to be creativity, especially from the agent side, right? Like they need to have some free reign to like be a person because you are talking to another person. So
Right.
how are you able to look at these frameworks you've developed, strategy you've developed, and build them in a way that doesn't like kind of kill all creativity from a human level?
Yeah, and I think you build it as a human. The first step is always understanding what your technical support looks like. If you have good solid tech, you can create anything. I've always kind of lived by the rule: if I can think it, it can be done. I mean, it's like I'm not so brilliant that like I'm coming up with these unicorn ideas that are moonshots. There's somebody there that can do that if I can think about it. If you don't have tech support, that's where things get really tricky because people start to piece things together, third party systems or just the way that they're running their day-to-day operations, and they could be redundant with those, or they could be using not the right product. Again, very very specific to the consumer. The agents, I think, kind of go with the flow. They know that there's changes, and the more tools that you can give them within like a dialer, the more access they have to be able to say, okay, this is the best route for this. And in fact, my current client, who's doing it a little bit different, where they run from a fronter to a closer, in house, they're in the same spot, but it is very good for them because they keep their roles very separate. They ask for that because it defines them.
Yeah. And then when you look at, the different agents and how they're able to kind of go with the flow, um, in your opinion, what do you think separates like a good agent from like the great ones in the space?
Right. There's a hustle to it. I guess there's customer service agents, there's sales agents, there's fronter agents. And just because one does one extremely well, it doesn't mean they're going to do all of those roles very well. So really understanding where they fit and where their drive is. If they're motivated by commissions, if they're motivated by, closing the deal, if they like to solve people's problems, if they just like to talk to people. Each one of those is a very defined role, and making sure that they're in the right spot.
And I was actually that ties, I was thinking a lot about the motivational aspects. In your opinion, what do you think is the biggest motivator, from different roles, like from an agent to a dialing admin to an owner or operator? Do you think it's the mission, the money, even yourself from an operations perspective, like building something that works? Like, how would you define like people that are like really good within this space, building successful call centers? What do you think is the core motivation behind, why they get up every day to do it?
Yeah, I think they have a clear vision. They've come up with a strategy and they've set their goals. They're not afraid to pivot on the goals if they're not attainable. They will change. They'll change the recipe. I'm trying to think of a few of like the successful people that I know and how they do it. And every one of them is a grinder. They get up. They're the first ones like looking at the systems in the morning. They're the last ones at night. They're running reports. They know what questions to ask if they don't know where to find the information. And they're looking to fill like that goal at the end of the day. So let's say you're trying to close, leads. Are you running a report of everybody that was interested? And do you set up your cadence differently for those that are? And is there somebody who's very good at bridging that gap? And do we put them on that? It's constantly tweaking when people have a job that they like to show up for 8 to 10 hours a day, they're going to do so much better at it. So I think clearly understanding the strategy and the end game and the goal. I mean, back in the day, we used to call it mission and vision. And I think people have really gotten away from that. I think it's a mistake. I think if there's a clear mission, on what we're trying to achieve, people know what to go for. It's like
And what
sports.
would you say it's on your side? Like what motivates you? The mission, money, or the mechanics building something?
I like to see things. I like to see my ideas work.
Hmm.
I like to I like money. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I like money. It's, my dad was a teacher for 35 years, and he asked why I didn't teach. And I said, I do every single day. I just make more money than you did.
That's
And it's true. Cause there's so much in this space, and I'm learning every single day. So I think, understanding that there are just a million different places and ways to go in this industry, and wanting to learn all of them, that's probably my weakest, link, is like, I want to know how to do it all, but you can't. So I do well at creating the strategy and then putting the pieces in place to fulfill that.
Totally. And when did you know that it was time for you to kind of launch your own consulting firm, right? Versus, I know that you've been in-house, you're doing consulting. Like, when did you feel it's like consulting is actually like the next, like, this is just, it fits more with what I'm doing with my life?
Right. I like the flexibility and the freedom of consulting. I owned my own company for 17 years. And I think once you have that, where you are the person setting the goals and responsible for hitting them, and, keeping everybody motivated, walking into a role where you're not that person is really tough. So, I won't ever say I won't go into an in-house role again. I just have to be in that position to be able to be, driving that ship and motivating the people to see the entire, goal. But
Yeah, I hear you on
yeah,
that. That makes sense. Yeah, I kind of work that same way too, where it's, um, and something that you said similar, like I like to see my ideas work. I'm the exact same way, especially being on the marketing side. Like, I love kind of creating content or campaigns, that it's kind of outside the box, but for some reason it just like, it's so kind of in left field that it just works. Cause
right.
like it hasn't really been done before. And just seeing the response rates for it is always fun. I remember I was working at a company called App Dynamics.
Yeah.
Ran this campaign. It was all built on the dashboard, right? So, and I was looking at like a Google Images, and it looked like the way the dashboard was set up, it looked like they were talking to each other, like almost like text bubbles were talking back and forth, because it was
Oh,
like
wow.
indicating like how things worked within the application ecosystem. And so I created this campaign on Twitter that was called Talking Nodes. And it was really just how these nodes,
You're a nerd.
this is very, very into like the dev space. Um, but it was all about how these nodes were talking to each other for application performance monitoring. And what ended up happening, I launched it on Twitter, and then the next day I wake up and it's driven like, it drove like 1,000 people to the website for like $100. And then
Oh
we kept
boy.
that campaign going, and it ended up being a nice test where we drove like 100,000 people to the website.
Wow.
And it only was like a $5,000 or $10,000 test budget. And it was
Wow.
like insane, because it was like a cost per site visit was like a penny. Like, you
Yeah.
just don't
And
see
what did
that.
they get out of that on the back end? That's the
Totally.
that's the
I mean, there's
that's the
tons of brand
crazy part.
awareness that happened with it. There's a lot of site conversions, people engaging, just kind of like, getting the name out there is great.
I love
Um,
that. I love that part of this industry is like creating the brand. Even if it's not, even if you're working for a brand, but you have to create your own brand to get out there in lead generation. I think that, that's a hidden art.
yeah, and I think that you have to, right? And
Yeah.
I come at it from a different angle, because it's very B2B marketing, very software marketing. But
Yeah.
before you can just start generating responses, right? You kind of have to have a brand that can back up your claims of how you
Right.
can perform better, right?
Yep.
So, how does that translate on your side with, even with like Medigap Life, right? Especially like we're in open enrollment right now. Like, how do you
Yeah.
see the branding element of a lot of insurance sales, and how do you bring insurance sales to life, especially from more of a consumer angle versus even like a business perspective?
Yeah, Medicare is really a tough industry.
Mhm.
It's got so many like nuances with the rules and what you can and can't say and how you drive a consumer and certain times of the year. So AEP kind of opens up that floodgates, but you spend all year thinking about it. So when I joined Medigap Life, they were Medigap Life. They were buying leads. And one of the pivots that they did and they did well was they decided to start to create their own one-to-one owned and operated site. So that's what I started with them, doing with them. And Seek Advantage was the brand. And now, it's an industry name within our space. People understand what it is, but it took a lot of getting out there, LinkedIn marketing, branding it, putting it in front of people and changing it. So it was Medigap is the engine behind it, but Seek Advantage was that consumer facing product that, it builds trust and it puts it in front of the consumer. And it's just it was just a great transition for them.
That's great. And what would
Yeah.
you say, like, I know we're chatting about we're chatting about success stories or just different campaigns that you've done. When you kind of look back, like, what do you think your biggest success story is? It can be from Medigap, it could be from other initiatives companies you've worked with, consultant programs you've worked on, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a hard one to pinpoint. I think it's kind of a culmination. I don't Everything has been successful in one way or another, right? We got the leads, we drove the pages, but I think the learning as I went, which I feel is like the biggest success. Like if I was 25 and in this space, um you can't know what somebody who's been doing this for 25 years. It's just impossible. And I still learn something new every single day. And I listen and I think the biggest value, that I have is that the network of people that I've gotten to know are such a good sounding board to like bounce ideas off of and say, do you think this would be successful? Or do you think that this would be a better way to do it? So, I mean, my first success was getting email delivered. And then can spam hit and, my whitelisted domains disappeared. So I started creating owned and operated sites. And then the owned and operated sites, their messaging or their core offers changed. And, you just keep going. And then you add a call center and then you add SMS, then you add push technology. So it just kind of continues to keep driving.
Yeah, and evolving. Like, how do you think that, like, the whole AI, like ChatGPT, like, how do you think that's evolving with outbound within call center or even performance marketing?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy good. And, like for the people that are developing the technology. So as somebody who likes the back end and removing the risk of somebody saying a non-compliant something or using it to verify and double check before it gets to a human. I think it's an amazing technology. I do believe that it is going to take jobs away. I just will, because anytime that we can implement something where human error is removed from it, we tend to do that. But I
Right.
think it's going to be a while until we can trust that to do that completely.
How
Um,
are you consulting around AI right now? Like, how do you
uh,
recommend? Like, what are your thoughts on, like, how do you actually start bringing it more into the call center?
Right. It's looking at what people are developing and seeing how it fits into the benefits of it. So there's a lot of technologies that will do the fronter piece for you in an
Mhm.
AI. I've got somebody I know who built AI human interaction video. Like click to talk to me right now. And I'm a person who is just excited for when like the chat bot comes up, because at the end of the day, I don't want to pick up a phone and talk to somebody if I can help it. I hate talking on the phone. So if I can chat with somebody, if I could chat with a human, that's my ideal. So I think we've got a little ways to go on that before the consumers trust it. It's if they know it's there, that's going to be the sticking point. I think legally, and I think it's going to be for technology. Who's going to be monitoring the technology to ensure that errors aren't happening, especially in the Medicare space or in the health space where there could be privacy issues.
Totally. I want to switch topics a little bit, maybe. When you look at culture within the call center, like what does culture mean within the call center? Maybe we can start there, and then we can actually talk about, how do you motivate a lot of the agents?
I think with me and when I talk about culture, I don't change a lot between who I am personally and who I am professionally. I used to be pretty serious and kind of uptight when it came to regulations and rules, and I still am serious about those. But at the end of the day, I try to be really human. So talking to people like humans and asking, like if somebody's underperforming, what do you have going on in your life? Because that's, what happens outside is a great impact on what's happening on your day to day. And I like to talk to the managers a lot. I'll ask them if they know where to find the data like that they're asking for. And if they don't, you got to teach them. And
Yeah.
then you got to teach them why. Like, why are we pulling a report of, contact rate or what dial level we are at and what that looks like? And because if you assume people know what to do all the time, it creates this kind of barrier of my role and your role when they should be more in sync.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's even stuff like that. I've noticed a lot of, there's a podcast that I listen to, All In podcast. I'm not sure if you listen to it or not, but one of the first things that I forget who was saying is like, before you talk to anyone, ask ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's kind of a refreshing way of like, can you get the answer without distracting anyone else first? And
Right.
then, so try to get that answer on your own, use the tools that are available, right? And then if you're still having a problem with it, then yeah, reach out and engage
It's
with
your mom's version of look it up.
pretty much, or like I can
Yeah.
Google this for you, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. It's
but
funny
it's
how that's
like,
changed from Google to
it
ChatGPT.
absolutely has. I mean, like, instead of shifting through 12 different blogs to try to find the answer, you can actually just get a step-by-step solution, which makes
Right.
it the way that you interact with the internet is completely changed.
It
Um,
does. And I just sorry to interrupt you there. One of
right.
my things is like looking at the AI though as a marketing person and then talking to a tech person about it. And the aha moments that happen sometimes are funny. They're like, "How did you know that?" I'm like, "I asked ChatGPT," and they're like, "I didn't even think about that."
Yeah.
Like people who are experts don't think about it to go to it.
Yeah,
So
it's crazy. It's a great tool.
yeah,
Um, it's crazy. Also crazy. Like so I have a 2-year-old daughter. She's never going to know a world without AI, right?
yeah.
Um, similar like, I knew a world without the internet, but she's never going to know the world
Did you
without
watch
AI.
Law and Order last night? It was terrifying.
I did not. I did not
It
watch
was
that.
about like AI in pictures of like your classmates in like various compromising positions, and a teacher got fired, and a kid, and it's like that's terrifying. Like I don't even like think that when I go onto my Chat GPT. I use it to like brainstorm a lot,
Mhm.
and yeah, but I was just like, this is terrifying, and it depends, I guess, on the mind that's using it and what's it's different. It's way
Yeah,
different.
it definitely is. I know they're building a lot of safeguards to minimize that as much as possible, though.
Yeah.
Um, So getting back on discussion of just like culture, and you're connected to a lot of smart people. Um, who's someone in the space that's you feel is quote unquote crushing it, and that you think that should be on Closers Club?
Oh, Amanda Ferris and Sarah Malo for sure.
Okay.
They run Link Unite, and it's a women's group, networking group. But beyond just networking, I mean, they've grown this organically in the last couple of years, and it's become something so much more. I mean, it is a place where we do connections, but women can ask, how do I set up my estate the right way? Do you know anybody hiring? It's like a go-to for women, and it's not anti-men in any way, shape, or form. And when I joined it initially, right off the bat, some of the guys I worked with are like, "Why do you need that? We don't have a guys club." And I was literally sitting at a dinner with 10 men when he said
Mhm.
that, and I'm like, "Dude, look up." And so there's a little bit of that. You're playing. You're not. It's a different arena. Women in this space. And when I started, there was like five of us. And I didn't help women because I had my head down building my own thing. And now I feel like I'm in a position to help women. And I try to wherever and however we can. And it's not that I'm not there to help guys. I do that too. But they're such a great resource, and they know so many people in different, facets of this space, that they put the connections together that are crazy. Like a lead conduit system and somebody that needs, a different dialer or, yeah.
If you were not doing what you're doing right now, what do you think you would be doing? Like if you were not in marketing and sales, call center, what do you think you would be doing?
I most likely would probably live in the country and have a hobby farm. I would be
Sell
doing
some sweet
something.
corn? Go
Yeah,
back
sell
to
my
some.
sweet corn.
Okay.
Exactly. I know. I have a couple horses, and yeah, I
That's
don't know.
fun. And
Yeah.
the final question that I have for you, in your view, like your definition, what is a closer?
The person who gets it done, whatever it is. So you can have closers and sales on your agent side. You can have, account managers that are closers. You can have tech that are closers. They are the people that you go to when you need something to get done.
Very cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Penny, thank you so much for the time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure that our audience will too, and just grab a lot of these insights you provided and help them grow their business.
No, thank
So
you. This flew
yeah,
by.
yeah, it did. It really did.